Marcio, Alex, welcome to our Fireside Chat. Really good to have you both. How are you?
Hi, Martin. Pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. As I mentioned earlier, it's my first time, our first time on this series, interviewing two different people, but I think it's for a very good reason. You're both co-authors of a book, Value Advisory, a new Amazon hot-selling book all on value selling, value advisory. I'd love to hear more about it on this session, because I think there's a lot of really great nuggets of wisdom and information for any individual organization trying to roll out a value practice. But before we do, I would love, just for the benefit of our audience, for each of you to give a bit of background yourselves, a bit of your career in value, what are things you love about it, and where you are today. Alex, why don't you kick off?
Sure. Thanks again, Martin, for having us. I'm currently a sales strategy director at Workday. My background is actually in capital markets and investment banking. I started my career during the time of a pre-financial crisis, and that was a very interesting time just to see how the industry was evolving. But always had an interest in technology. I've worked previously a little bit in the venture capital and fund and a few startups, and that ultimately what kind of took me to the technology industry. Didn't really know what value advisory was when I first was coming into the job. Frankly, I thought I was applying for more of an account management job. But Marcio, who was actually my colleague at the time, he sort of saw the potential of the transferable skills that I had from capital markets, from investment banking. And that's how I ended up in value advisory, which was a very interesting profession. And that's what I was doing for a number of years before moving to sales strategy.
Great. Thank you, Alex. Marcio, how about you?
My way into value management was via the industry, via technology. I always worked in technology. So a long time ago, when I graduated in Brazil, I worked in telecoms for 7 or so years. Came to London to do my MBA, which led me to consulting also around technology, which led me to, I feel like Alex, right? I joined this value management team at Oracle at that point without knowing exactly what that meant. I just saw a flow of people from consulting into that type of role at Oracle. And I went there, and I liked the science and the art of it. And then I moved to Workday to do a similar role. And Workday, I spent much more time, like 9 years or so, half of the time in value management. And then just like Alex described, I also moved to sales strategy from value management. So it's kind of a natural kind of consulting, value management, sales strategy type of role. So that's what I do up until today.
It's funny because you do see a trend of that. People who come out of consulting, maybe they want something new, maybe they want to go on client side. And we see a lot of people from the value advisory, value consultancy come from that space, the big consultants. What is the appeal? What is the appeal of this specific area of expertise that really, appeals to the consultant?
Well, I'll take this one, Alex. So let's think about the supply and the demand side, right? From the consultant side, there's a lot about two things. A lot about lifestyle. That's undeniable. I mean, you move from consulting to a kind of a normal job where you work hard, but it's not overnight. It's not every weekend or something like that. So that's one of the appeals. The second one is there's always a little bit of frustration as a consultant that you are not driving the car. You're a bit of a navigator. You tell people where to go, but you cannot make the decisions. It could be a bit frustrating that after a few years, you produced a lot of interesting material, a lot of good intelligence, but you didn't decide if you're going to adopt that or not. So that for me on the supply side, let's say these are the two. On the demand side, I think it's all about the skills, right? I mean, the skills that you need to be a strategy consultant are very similar. Well, there's a big overlap with value management. Analytical skills, exactly. So being able to digest, for me, what summarizes, it's good customer hands. So you need to be in touch with people every day, interview people, understand. But I think the main one is to digest a huge amount of qualitative and quantitative unstructured information and distill that and try to build a hypothesis. That's what a consultant does, and that's pretty much what a value management does. So that's why it does a very easy flow.
Yeah, it's a bit bringing science, even more science into sales to a degree. That kind of analytical view, critical thinking. Interesting. Definitely. Yes. Alex, how about your thoughts on it?
Yeah, look, I think the constructive mindset, I think, is the ultimate, one of the major requirements in being successful in value consulting. But that's also why, for example, for myself, I come from a bit of a different background. I come from, as I said, investment bank, capital markets. Nevertheless, that analytical background, the ability to deconstruct the sales cycle becomes crucially important, because ultimately sales, a lot of people say the sales is an art. I do strongly believe it is a science. There's perhaps more flexible component to it, but it can be really deconstructed into multiple success criteria, and that is really, really what's key.
I love that concept of deconstructing the sales process, sales cycle, because every stage has its own nuances, its own success criteria, and you can't pass through the gate of the next stage until you properly finalize one. Otherwise, the risk of that deal, progressing forward positively goes in the bin, so to speak. Could you dive deeper into that?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, just to reiterate the point, Marcio and I kind of worked together at that time, but we were sitting during a presentation by an account exec, a very successful account exec, and the presentation was really about what he thought was sort of the key ingredients to a successful deal, and he broke it down into something like 26 components.
Wow.
And yeah, it sounds overwhelming, but at the same time, I think it goes down to the essence that it is really a science. It's not just art.
It's amazing. And so, you guys, at what point did you meet each other at Workday? Did you meet at Workday?
We did, yes.
I can very proudly say that I hired Alex into Workday. So
amazing.
That's when we met. So yeah, we needed a value manager. And yeah, Alex applied, and we chose him, and we're very happy with the decision.
So you got somebody that comes from. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Marcio and I worked a few years alongside, and that was a partnership that kind of really lasted beyond that, more into a friendship now.
I was going to say, so you both kind of met up at the same time you were hired into Workday. Marcio, you come from the consulting space into value advisory. Alex, you come from the investment banking, capital market side, and then you both decide to write a book. Where did that come from? What was moonlighting as authors? Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
Well, yeah, I'll start off, Marcio, and then you chip in. Really, value selling, right, more broadly, is a very known concept. Every account executive does value selling. And but at the same time, Marcio and I we felt that what we do in our jobs was very different from value selling. It was very, very different than what every account exec does. So actually, if you go on Amazon and just search for value selling, there's going to be dozens of books there. But nevertheless, neither of those really hits the point as to what value advisory or value consulting really is. And the reason why we decided to write the book is obviously we wanted to share with the world sort of what that was. And we thought, it's a very interesting perspective on how to think about the sales process. Again, deconstructing into different aspects of it, but really communicating the value that during the purchasing process that the buyer needs to be thinking about what is the investment going to be worth. And it's a much more of a scientific approach. It's one that then has to be thought about, well, how is that ingrained into the sales process as well? And we wanted to share our knowledge with the world. We also wanted to, let the world know that there is a profession out there like that, and it's a career path for some.
And Marcio?
Yeah, my take. So I'll take again the supply and demand analogy from the market side, right? We thought this was an exciting topic because of course, there's always been competition since the Iron Age, but this has been increasing, especially in some industries like software, and vendors started having trouble differentiating, right? So. Yeah. On the buyer side, they started getting much more professional in assessing solutions and deciding, do a demo, do another demo, 10 demos, architecture review, and then put through kind of purchasing desks and all of that. And I think the sales side, the vendor side of that had to be professionalized at the same level. So, okay, what can we do on our side to show to this potential buyer that our solution not only is different from the others, but deserves, for example, that premium price, or deserves to be bought instead of A, B, or C, or to one of our previous conversations, to do nothing, which is a very big competitor. So I think this was kind of almost like the vendors catching up with the professionalism on the other side, on the buying side as well.
That's a really interesting point, that the vendors needed to catch up because buyers were becoming more knowledgeable buyers, not so much about the specific category, but about the process of buying and what they needed in order to be able to make a decision. I'm sure that was being pushed by CFO, finance, procurement, almost tooling themselves up to buy in a better way. And if a vendor isn't set up for that, then they'll get eaten alive when it comes down to conversation with procurement, right? I've lived that experience.
Exactly.
And no, really fascinating. The other thing that I'll say is on the, we're a Symbi, we're a platform that enables value selling at scale. What we're seeing, like notably, is an increase in the usage, even the questions to us around value engineering from companies that are much smaller than Workday. Like you would expect, Workday has a very well-known category for value services, right? Salesforce has BVS, business value services. All the big companies will have some sort of a value motion, irrespective of the number of people. But the value motion, the value engineer role, is starting to appear in companies as early as Series A these days. That's really fascinating because it's saying something about where the market is going, what kind of needs there are on a vendor side in order to be successful and compete in a market with more scrutinizing buyers. I'd love your take on that, if you're also seeing it.
I'll take this one first because I'm living that one, and Alex, I would love to hear your thoughts as well. I moved from Workday to a much smaller company in the same space, HR tech, called Eightfold, and of course we're much smaller. We don't have a big value management team, so we hired a senior value manager, a really phenomenal guy, but he's not scalable. He cannot be in every deal. So yes. What are the solutions? Right?
I got a tool for that.
Yeah, exactly. So that was that, right? Do we hire more people? Do we do an offshoring kind of? We have a big center in India to do software development. We have one person there doing value management? But we said, okay, let's not do that. Let's automate some of that stuff, and not only automate but self-service to the account executives. Can they do 80% of the input and some of the work? And then yes, value manager comes in if it's a large deal, does the interview. But yeah, that's how we thought about that, because we don't have the muscle and the structure that someone like Workday or Salesforce that you mentioned has. So yeah, I agree with you. We're a bit more mature than Series A, but yeah, we are very small compared to those companies, and we do need value management for the same reasons that Oracle, who is probably 300 times bigger than we are, needs value management. The reasons are the same.
Yeah, and Martin, it also goes beyond that, to be honest. One of the things that we, really try to explore in our work as well is how do we bring value advisory, value management, value consulting outside of just the B2B SaaS enterprise software industry. And there is huge potential for that. And to your point about, small companies adopting value advisory practices, again, it goes beyond that. You take a legal firm. There's definitely a way to communicate value that they're bringing to their customers, right? Sure. That's, you take a risk management firm, or you take a BPO, business process outsourcing firm, and there's definitely a lot of value to be communicated there. And to be honest, it's not just B2B, it's also B2C products, because nowadays essentially what we're facing is services and products that are becoming much more sophisticated for buyers to understand, especially as we're getting into technology, especially as we're getting into AI. And that is ultimately goes to the essence of what value advisory is. It's about the buyer understanding what benefit they're getting in return for paying the price. And, take a very basic example, take an electric vehicle. When you're buying an EV, you want to understand, well, what are the savings that you're going to make by buying a little bit more expensive car at first, but ultimately saving on the fueling costs, right? And that goes to, again, many other industries where I think it is applicable, and where, again, we hope we do see that companies are starting to adopt that kind of practice because, as I said, the world is becoming much more complex.
And it's really fascinating because the immediate idea is that this is purely a B2B model, but actually B2C has been doing this for ages. Just when they're advertising the value that you get from buying something, like the amount of mileage that you get with a car, that's value, right? That's a value conversation, right? And do you have examples in your book that talk to how value advisory or value is being applied across the B2B and B2C space?
100%, yeah. So that we covered quite a lot of that. Some of the earlier examples, I mean, you look at Tesla at some point, they don't have that now, but at some point they had a value calculator on their website. One of the sort of fundamental books on value advisory as well talks about wheel mirrors as what is the value behind that. And there's GE, for example, as well, at some point had a full-fledged value team. They may have it still now, but this is one of the early examples where they really try to help the customer understand what is the value of the products that we're buying. So we do see it much more beyond just B2B software.
And so going back to the B2B space, you'll have a business will have a main business strategy for the year. They'll have their sales model, their sales goals. How does the BVC or the value advisory align itself to the business strategy of an organization? Because I know you talk about that in the book. Because I think that's critical. If it's not aligned, if it's more of a tactical use, then it's just a side tool used by sales teams when they need to do business value assessment or business case. Whereas if it's inherently part of the business strategy, I would imagine it have a much stronger role and more intertwined role. I'd love to hear about that from you.
I'll start and then you. I mean, I'm leaving that now because we're setting up teams and all of that. So we are thinking about go-to-market strategy. Things like, should we go for companies above 50,000 employees or 10 to 50 or below 10? The way, if you're going to have a value team, which you always should, but the way you set this up depends on the strategy, right? The type of people you hire. So are you going to have some very expensive, very senior value managers if you're just going to target mid-market and do volume work? That doesn't make a lot of sense. So it does have to align with the company strategy. Also geography, right? I mean, I'm going to attack the French market. Okay, so you need a value manager that speaks French. That's quite obvious, but some companies don't do that. You start going to geographies and you have someone sitting somewhere in a different geography, in a different time zone, different language. So yes, the go-to-market strategy drives the VM strategy, and it needs to be aligned. I think with the maturity of value advisory today is quite obvious, and it's a bit like what you would do for pre-sales in previous years, right? Okay, if we're going to try to sell product A, I need pre-sales people trained to demonstrate product A, which is quite obvious today. But with value, maybe it's the same decision, but it took another 10 years for companies to realize that.
Yeah, and as part of actually writing the book, one thing that did force us to do is talk to a lot of our colleagues and really see what value teams, functions were like in those organizations. So we interviewed and analyzed probably 24 different organizations just to understand, what is the different levels of maturity of the value function within those companies, and one of the things that also came apparent to us, as Marcio said, it has to align a lot to the business strategy of the organization, but it also has to align to the product itself, the product or service, right? If we extrapolate it just beyond B2B software. And we should really be thinking about this as almost like a matrix of a scope of benefits on one hand side, scope of benefits of the product, and ability to measure those benefits on the other. So if you're, for example, providing a pretty basic solution like co-working space, for example, there's not much need to explain value there, right? There's not much need for a value consultant because it's pretty intuitive. If you're providing a more advanced product, where there's a more broader set of benefits, but at the same time, which are pretty certain, which are pretty, easy to explain, such as, for example, business process outsourcing, you'll need to explain the value. By doing that, would be pretty easy. If the product is, for example, in the ERP system, the set of benefits become much more broad-based, right? Yeah. And it's a little bit more difficult to quantify. So you do need a team that is more capable to explain in depth, more in depth the benefits that come with the solution, and as well as sort of how does that apply. And finally, if you are more of like a something like Tableau, where a visualization tool where it's very use case driven, right? So you're really not sure what the preset benefits could be and are highly applicable just to the use case, to the organization itself. And this is really where sort of the need for value advisor becomes key. And that has to be not just a more of a junior function where it's just about enabling the salesperson. It has to be much more in-depth, higher engagement. So sort of pairing this up, what Marcio said about really thinking about, are you a premium product? Are you looking to offer a premium experience as part of the buying process, as well as what is the need to explain the value? Then you're starting to derive a model for your value function, which can be a few people, for example, where take it like Braze as pretty basic solution, recruitment solution, which has the ratio of value advisors to salespeople something like 1 to 100. Or you take a more of the extreme side of this, something like Salesforce's Ignite team, which works with highly strategic customers. And at that point, they're investing a lot of their time in understanding the strategic needs of the customer, really doing very tailored work and delivering a very bespoke analysis, which obviously is time consuming and quite brings a higher cost to the organization.
That's really, really well put. And you mentioned something earlier, which was the use case driven sales. It makes a lot of sense, right? If it's a use case driven sale, then it's a much more custom consultative process where you need to understand before you can actually say what you have to offer. And if you're a company that sells a service that maybe data analytics, where there's just so many different routes and value that you can do from that, or if you're an AI tooling platform that can help automate any sort of workflow component, then you need to start with the problem first and then understand how you're going to solve that problem and the value of that problem. And so I can see how important a much more custom value advisor role is required.
Exactly that. It's much, in my past experience, when you are selling a product that's more use case driven, you walk into the room and you're there to listen. You're there to understand what are the challenges that the prospect has.
Not demo.
Not demo, and definitely not read of a script, because ultimately you're trying to get to the heart of the problem. And then based on that, that's when, again, sort of those analytical skills of the value advisor come in play, and for them to really translate what the product delivers to how that solves the challenge that the customer is facing. What
is the cutoff, the ACV cutoff, to have a value consultant or to not have a value consultant? Where does it not become scalable?
It's a great question.
Is there a magic number?
It's a great question. Yeah. So Marcio and I really kind of thought a lot about that as part of as part of really trying to put everything into a framework, every sort of product, every industry in there. Marcio,
you mean the size of the deal, right?
Yeah.
I mean, when I started, we would say that anything below $1 million, we do something outside in or something a bit quicker. The industry evolved. At that time, 15 years ago, we would hire only very senior people, kind of senior consultants and all that. I think the industry found out that if you hire a pyramid, like Alex was saying, of value managers, different levels of seniority, you can start catering to smaller deals, right? So up until whatever, 200K ACV or something like that. You will not spend 6 months doing 20 interviews and 50 iterations of the business case for a 200K deal, but why don't you do like a POV or an outside in, do a couple of interviews, understand the value drivers and shoot? Because even in smaller deals, like Alex was saying, you were saying, you go there and say, okay, I'm going to tackle your employee turnover problems with our solution. And the person says, it's not a problem for us. It's actually way too low. So we get this thing sometimes. So don't go with something packaged just because the deal is small. Try to understand.
Yeah.
And I think that's that.
Please, Francisco.
No, I was just going to say the other consideration there now is also how we're making our job scalable. So with AI tools, to be honest, a value advisor can do much more than they used to, right? There's definitely a component to that's not scalable, but at the same time, involvement becomes much easier.
There is this universal law of gravity in sales, which is the higher the ACV of the deal, the lower the deal volume, the higher the win rate, right? It's just naturally how it works, right? And so what's interesting and something that we see a lot is those big deals is pretty straightforward. And you can really forecast win rate because you have your model, especially a company like Workday that has so much data already. You can kind of forecast your win rate statistically based on the size of the deal, the business value consultant time that's applied to it, and a number of other factors. As you go down the ACV or up the deal volume, imagine 6, 8, 10 deals handled per rep. That win rate goes right down because they simply don't have the bandwidth to apply value selling. And we see that a lot, right? And it's what we found is that if you all those are very, very different segments, different sales structures, but there's one number, one North Star metric that applies to everything, which is revenue contribution per rep. Because if you can definitely increase your win rates in mid-market, but that means you're going to handle fewer deals. And so your contribution ultimately will be lower because your win rate will be higher, but it won't be higher proportionally to how much you're able to deliver. And so I think a lot of what we do as in the space of value, both from a consultancy and a tool set perspective on our side, is how do we enable companies to increase that revenue contribution per rep? I think that's ultimately the source of friction or the source of the problem source for a lot of companies who are seeking to bring value and not quite knowing which segments, how much to invest in it. It's a big decision, right? It's an expensive resource. So actually, what would you say to companies that are Series A, Series B, maybe have a team of 10 sales reps, have an average ACV of more than 100K, just to make it a little bit more challenging on the question. What would you say when is the right time to bring in value advisory into the business?
From a rep size, team size perspective, any ratio like 1 to 10, 1 to 20, maybe if you have smaller deals. I do think that if you only have small deals around 100K, 200K, you might work with the senior VM and some sort of automation underneath it, or some offshoring, outsourcing, something like that. If you do have larger deals, then you become to scale the team. Yeah.
Something that I've started doing recently is some advisory work with young companies that are looking to build out a value advisory function. And I think what I try to generally communicate is that it's not about the team, it's about the function. And that means it doesn't necessarily mean you don't have to have a designated person who's doing value. It means that you got to have the tools, and you got to have what we sort of call value merchants. So salespeople who are skilled at talking about value and who are able to deliver a business case, very much like Simbi or any other automated tool that they're using proactively and that they're actually instilling into the sales cycle. So one of the organizations, for example, I worked with recently has only 2 salespeople, and they're very nascent in their value journey. But at the same time, what I've done with them was to craft their value proposition and given them tools for them to be inputting that into the sales cycle. So it doesn't have to be, I always say, it doesn't have to be a big team. It doesn't mean that you're designating resources for this. It just means that you're thinking about value as a function rather than just the value selling concept, which, as we know, as I said earlier, is not based on quantifiable value, but rather a more, research-based focused sales technique.
What we find is with a lot of the smaller companies, when we start speaking to them, oftentimes it's the product marketers who probably have their hand on the pulse of the value drivers, probably more than other individuals within the business, because they see the delivery of the product. They're probably the ones that have greatest access to the analytics of the product, what it's delivering, and can then deduce from that what is the economic value of that. So it's an unexpected ally within companies when you first join and you're speaking with sales. and it's a relatively successful sales team, but still relatively immature in some of the processes. They're doing some MEDPIC activities for qualification. They've got some of that, but they lack actually the baseline metrics on which to create these the outcomes, or understand really what the company's outcomes are. And I guess from your experience, how often have you engaged with product marketing? How intertwined can the role of a value advisor with a product marketer be in contributing to the value practice?
Interesting. In both my recent experiences at Workday, all the 9 years there, and now when you're at Eightfold, I would say it's indirect. I like to think of my pre-sales team, my solution consulting team, as my bridge to product, because they have the perfect balance between knowing the product very well, but having customer. They know customer. They smell where
solutions
they're going.
Minded.
Yeah, because they are there. They're on the field. Product marketing, especially us here in EMEA working for American companies, it's a headquarters company. It's someone sitting there in San Francisco. It's a bit of a corporate function. Yes, what they produce and what they bring ends up and in our hands as value managers. But I think that pre-sales solution consultants are the bridge to that. They are the perfect link between those two worlds.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In my value engagements, in my consulting engagements that I'm doing now, the first thing I do is I go to the website of a company and see, are there communicating value on their website? And that goes to how marketing is also thinking about value. So too often what happens is, it's a broad sales pitch as to what are we doing as a product, right? Sort of how perhaps we're solving needs, but it doesn't go to the essence of, again, sort of that business value that's being created. And I think that's
the legal term is puffery, by the way. I've heard
it. Exactly that, right? So it does take a more of a value-minded individual to really ingrain the value messaging into the marketing, because marketing naturally, individuals there are not, they're not skilled at thinking about value, right? They're thinking about how do we reach the broader audience, how do we perhaps position it within the industry, but the value messaging isn't quite there. And again, you look at every small company and they suffer from the same thing. You look at larger companies, and too often they suffer from the same thing as well, because they're getting too product specific. They're trying to differentiate based on product as opposed to differentiating based on value.
Brilliant. Thank you both. Really appreciate it. Okay, we've come to the final difficult question for you both.
Yep.
Marcio, I'll start with you. Yep. I do have two questions for you. The first one will be, in your experience and your career in value advisory, who is the best value advisor, value consultant, or value engineer you've worked with?
I'm going to be a bit selfish. I hired a lady called Arti Uplanchar to my team at Workday. I cannot say Alex because Alex is here. But,
of course.
Well, as I think about it, right? I mean, Arti passed the what I call the close my eye tests when she was presenting internally, for example, or in a dry run. Can I close my eyes and see her in front of a very, very nasty CIO of a very large company? And I say, yeah, very quickly. So this close my eye test for me is very important. I mean, does to have the and this is not just about being able to talk smoothly. She has the content and the delivery and the convincing power to be in front of a very senior executive whose job is to be difficult and not have the attention span for more than 5 minutes, and intimidating. So I think for me that's what I thought I saw in her, and I loved it right from the start.
Brilliant. Alex, how about you? Yeah, neither one of you are allowed to say each other, so you got to think outside the rectangle here.
That would have been my easiest option. I would probably have to call on my former colleague Ville Virtanen. Back in the day when I used to cover Finland, he was my counterpart there as well. And what I really loved about Ville, apart from being just a great value consultant, he's somebody who was also a salesperson. Because ultimately, value consultant is if they're client facing, of course, they have to be a salesperson as well. And he was just absolutely formidable in the way he was building relationships. He was absolutely great also in managing his territory. So that means working with the salespeople, working with the sales leadership in his team as well.
Brilliant. Yeah, I've seen that as well. Of course, consultants offer a tremendous amount of value, but having been on the sales side, being both a consultant, having been on the sales side, and understanding the sales condition and the nuances of sales and just the role itself, I think adds another layer of empathy to the role. I agree with you. Okay, the next one, Marcio. Who's the best sales rep you've ever partnered with?
I mean, that is not a surprise. This guy's a mythological kind of figure at Workday called Donna O'Callaghan. He's a sales guy who worked in Ireland and in the DACH region. I think the thing that struck me the most is the way, I mean, we were talking in the beginning about professional selling and professional buying. And one thing he mastered, and that's why he was the top sales guy for like whatever 8 years in a row, is dictating the sales cycle, dictating the sales process. He would sell the process, meaning great conversation. I know you kind of liked our product, you're evaluating. Let me tell you what's going to happen between now and 8 months from now, signature. You're going to do 3 more 4 demos. We need an architecture review by then. We're going to need to discuss pricing by June. We're going to have to review contract by whatever. I'm going to have to match you with a sponsor. So very prescriptive and very in command of the sales cycle. Because if you're not in command of the sales cycle, it becomes commoditized, and you have the risk of the other side buying just based on a 10% price difference because they do not. But if you conduct the sales cycle the way you want, you show your value, you show your difference, and you win the deal. And that he did it like massively.
I love that concept because even as a buyer, it's a favor that he's doing because they're providing you with the structure to go through something. So suddenly you feel much more at peace, calm. You understand that this is part of the process, and that's a degree of control that's very, very sense of control that's very important.
Exactly.
Great. How about you, Alex?
I would say my colleague at Workday, Stuart Neal. Previously, I mentioned a gentleman that Marcio and I had the pleasure to listen to who spoke about the 26 ingredients to a successful deal. That was him. Yeah, I absolutely love how he's super constructive about the sales cycle. And he knows what to do from the day of demand generation, of how to build his pipeline. He's absolutely incredible at qualifying deals. I think, especially for my role right now as a sales strategy, one of the key components to my role is being able to forecast across the region. And when it's Stuart's deal, I know that deal has a very high chance of getting to the finish line because he has qualified it well. He has done incredible discovery throughout the process, and he knows every step all the way to closing. He's got it all planned out. He's being very flexible around it. He's very collaborative with the client, but he also is very good at engaging the team. And this is actually, in my prior experiences, in my prior role as value consultant, one thing that I've noticed the best salespeople do, they involve their extended team, whether it's a value consultant, it's a pre-sales, it's the delivery expert. Everybody has to be involved because ultimately you are trying to get momentum and you're covering all the bases, and that's what he's really good at doing it.
Sometimes you just wish you could clone some of these people.
Absolutely.
Brilliant.
Not easy.
Well, look, thank you very much for your time today. I really enjoyed it. I am going to do something. I'm going to see if I can share my screen so we can share a little bit of your book. Are you offering any discounts for any of the people on today's call listening?
It's already a discounted price on Amazon. So
Anybody interested, get the book. It's fantastic. It's Value Advisory, Selling in the Complex World of Endless Alternatives. Alex, Marcio, thank you so much for making the time today. We hope to have you back soon.
Pleasure talking to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Martin.